Ahoy hoy, I'm Planetwalk, and today we are going to be taking a look at Pseudoscientist number 6. We're over halfway there, folks, and I think this is a good spot to sort of take a second to relax, especially if you're doing a binge of this series, because if you're doing a binge of the series, I do not envy you. That is not something that I would recommend. Just so you know, if you die or injure yourself while watching my videos, I'm not liable. Now you may be wondering if everybody apart from Mudman research that I'm covering in this series is a flat earther, and the answer is not quite. Whilst most of them are, there is sort of this flat earth zone that we seem to be in. I don't know how it happened, but all the flat earthers kind of just got grouped together in this list. Fortunately though, tomorrow's video is the last video in the flat earth zone, so we'll be on to more interesting things, I guess. Although the subject of today's video, whilst they are a flat earther, they don't necessarily just stick to flat earth subjects. They also spout transphobia! Yay. Now I'm not going to cover their transphobia today because I have actually enjoyed this series being fun. Transphobia and homophobia, whilst they can be important subjects to cover, they aren't really fun, they're more depressing. Let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in me covering later in the comments. Anyway, today's flat earther is Right the Hand. Someone who has attempted to prove that 1 + 1 = 1 because if you've got 1 cup of coffee and another cup of coffee and you put 1 cup of coffee into the other cup of coffee, then you have 1 cup of coffee. Except it probably overflowed. Apparently the correct application of maths is too hard for this person who claimed to be really good in maths back in school. Anyway, today he's talking about measuring things. So what have you got for us, Right the Hand?
Alright, so we're building this project here. Alright, so you see it's a room, we got a, thing. Now I had to measure, right? You gotta measure from here to there, right? That's a measurement. You have to measure, okay? Now, I'm saying you can only measure what you can sense.
Okay, so this sounds similar to other arguments that Right the Hand has made in the past. Talking about how seeing things is the only way to validate that they're happening, or something along that line. It was a long time ago. Of course, there are several things that you cannot see, or in this case sense, that you can measure. And we will get into those, but first, let's let Right the Hand go on for a little bit more.
Okay. Now, let's say there was some kind of thing in the sky that I couldn't sense. Right, or the speed of light. I can't sense it. How do you measure that?
You measure it by using tools that are designed to measure those things. In the case of the speed of light, you could have a laser which fires a beam that reflects off a mirror to hit a detector. Now when the laser fires, you start a timer on the detector, and then when the detector receives light, it stops that timer. Now if you have the distance that the light travelled and the amount of time that it took, then you know how fast the speed of light is. Now of course that's not something that's necessarily easy to do, but that is a general idea how you could measure the speed of light. You don't have to be watching the light with binoculars as it makes its way to the detector.
What is a measurement? It's a quantification of what you can sense. I can sense the distance in between these with my eyes. I sense the distance.
Do you sense the distance though? You know the size of it relative to other things that you can see, but you don't know the actual size of it. That is generally why people use measuring tapes rather than going, oh yeah, that's definitely 5 meters long.
Now I want to quantify that distance so I can explain it to other people. That's where I would measure it, okay? I would measure from there to there.
But you don't measure it using your senses though. So why would you limit what you can measure to things that your senses can detect? Furthermore, whose senses are we talking about? Maybe think about that for a second.
Right? Like let's say I can touch this and I'm like, oh this is cool, quote, cool. So the metal is hotter. Okay, I can sense that. I can sense the difference in, quote, temperature, so you can measure that. You can only measure what you can sense because measuring is quantifying what you sense.
Not really. Measuring is just simply figuring out the quantity of something, often done by using tools. The limits to measurement should never be what you can sense. It should be what the tools you are using can measure.
So if you can't sense something, you can't quantify it to then put a measurement to it.
Why not? If there is something that I can't sense, like, let's say, the voltage of electricity, why can't I measure that? There are tools out there that can measure the voltage of electricity and go, oh yeah, this is 9 volts. If I decide to make a circuit, my sensors can't tell me anything about the resistance in that circuit, but tools can. And guess what? All that is needed in order to make things that you are using to use the internet right now. Do you seriously think they would be able to make phones without measuring anything to do with electricity that we can't sense? No, of course not.
So if you can't sense the speed of light, how are you quantifying it? You can't. You're just looking at a screen and going up, oh, but there's a time, there's a delay. That's not sensing the object moving.
Again, we have tools to measure these kinds of things. Why would you limit yourself by what you can sense? That just makes, it makes no sense.
Right? And this is where you get, and then they'll say, it's evidence. And this is where I'm going to wrap this up so beautifully, and it puts again to all this bullshit that I fucking am tired of, I don't deal with it anymore. I've moved on, but I'm telling you how to deal with it, right? So when somebody says they have evidence for something, evidence is what you can sense.
No, evidence does not require you being able to sense anything. Evidence does rely heavily on measurements to some extent. So if measurements don't require you to be able to sense them in order to be valid, then evidence doesn't require you to be able to sense it to be valid.
And you can prove this so easily with just a simple fucking question. If I didn't sense anything, what is that evidence of? Right? So I sense nothing.
Well, you not being able to sense anything is not evidence of anything, obviously. However, evidence is independent of your senses. But let me propose a counter scenario, because there are times when you cannot sense anything. Like, for example, when you're in a coma and you can't sense anything. You can't sense time passing in a coma, but when you wake up, there is evidence that time passed. If the last thing that you remember was that it was 2020 and you wake up in 2022, well, there's certainly going to be evidence of that. It doesn't stop being evidence simply because you cannot sense it, so therefore it must be independent of your senses. And also, let's bring it back to the question that we asked earlier. Whose senses are we talking about? Are we talking about a blind person's senses, a deaf person's senses, or someone who cannot sense temperature? Do deaf people get to say that sounds can't be measured because they can't sense it? You see, that becomes a big problem if you only allow evidence for things that you can sense. And that is another reason why evidence is independent of what you can sense.
I don't hear anything.
Well, that explains why you don't listen to people telling you that the Earth is a globe.
Exactly. So if you don't get the sense through your senses, there's no evidence. And so this is why people, there's evidence that the Earth is a ball. Well, what did you sense? Did you sense the Earth being a ball? No. Well, then that's not evidence.
But you can't sense that the Earth is flat either. So it seems like to figure out the shape of the Earth, we have to use something that isn't our senses.
Is that evidence of chickens?
Yes, those chickens walking around there is evidence that there is chickens in the place that you live.
Well, you see chickens, right? That's not evidence.
Wait, but I thought that sensing things was evidence, and now you're telling me that it's not?
See, evidence leads people to believe that there's a missing component. Okay? Oh, I have evidence of a chicken, right? An egg. That's evidence of a chicken. No, it's an egg, right? It's not evidence of a chicken. It could be a duck.
Okay, time to delve into the philosophy of this once again. Evidence is not proof. Proof means that there can be no doubt whatsoever about something, whereas evidence is an indication of that thing. Now, when it comes to science, there is no such thing as proof, because everything can be wrong. So instead what you use evidence, which is an indication as to what is correct. If you find an egg and it looks like a chicken egg, then that is evidence that there is probably a hen nearby. But just because you have evidence for a conclusion, it doesn't mean that that conclusion is correct. It could be that you're wrong about the hen. Now, even if you find a hen, that doesn't mean that you have proof of a hen nearby, because it could be that it's just a NASA agent dressed up as a hen. Instead, what you have is evidence that is very strong, and most people will go, yeah, there's no doubt that there's a hen nearby.
And this is what happens when you go from not sensing what you're trying to quantify and quantifying what you didn't sense. So you cannot quantify what you don't sense. And if it's not sensed, it's not evidence. So the only thing you can quantify is the evidence that you sensed.
Okay, well, using that logic, I cannot use any of my senses to determine whether Right the Hand has a brain. So therefore, there is no evidence that Right the Hand has a brain. There's obviously so much wrong with what he's saying here, and he's using it as a way to just dismiss evidence that he finds uncomfortable. One of the things that he also ignores is the fact that your senses can be quite unreliable, especially after a few drinks. That's why I'd trust readings from tools and stuff like that any day of the week over my own senses.
This is going to be a deck. That'll be up there.
Okay, well, good luck with your deck. I hope that goes well and that you enjoy your new deck. But anyway, I think that's a good place to end it, so leave a like and subscribe if you liked that video. Be sure to join us tomorrow where we will take a look at a flat earther that doesn't actually exist. Or at least going off what has happened in the series, I do have to conclude that he doesn't exist. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons: Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, SHaKie, Jett Alone, Nathaniel Muller, Vermont1777, Wolfie, Morrie, Graymore Ghost, KidVicious, Sacha Campbell, Kitten, McKitten from Kitten Town, Craig D'Amelio, Nurthen Thurmpson, and Richard M Chapman. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link there. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.